At an upscale restaurant, a calm black official sits down, hoping to enjoy a rare moment of peace during lunch. But that peace is shattered when a drunken cop bursts in, demanding the table with threats and fury. The tension erupts as a gun is drawn and the room goes still. What the officer doesn't realize is that the black man across from him holds more power than he ever imagined. And today, this cop is about to learn a lesson he'll never forget. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thought. The heavy glass door of the Monarch table gave a soft whoosh as Marcus Reese stepped inside, smoothing the front of his dark gray suit with one hand, the other clutching a slim leather briefcase. The rich scent of roasted meats and truffle butter floated through the air, mingling with the soft, steady hum of jazz piano rising from unseen speakers tucked into the polished mahogany beams overhead. Warm, golden light cascaded from the tall chandeliers like a gentle waterfall, catching in the crystal glasses and silver cutlery set perfectly on white-clothed tables. Every detail inside the restaurant whispered of wealth, order, and the kind of quiet luxury only certain people could afford. Marcus paused just inside the threshold, letting the soothing atmosphere seep into his worn nerves. His sharp brown eyes, framed by a few early lines at the corners, scanned the room with instinctive precision, a habit from years of navigating tense courtrooms and administrative minefields. His 6-foot frame held a certain controlled strength, the way an oak tree held itself against the winds. Today, Marcus carried the exhaustion of a man who had spent the morning buried under mountains of misconduct reports and bitter political meetings, forced again to weigh the heavy flaws of the system he fought to preserve. All he wanted, for one brief hour, was peace. "I'm Mr. Max McKinley." A hostess, young and composed, approached with a professional smile. Her navy uniform was crisp, her heels clicking lightly against the marble floor. "Good afternoon, sir. Table for one?" she asked, her voice polite, practiced. Marcus nodded with a tired but genuine smile. "Yes, please. Something quiet if you can." "Of course. Right this way, Mr. Reese." She led him across the main dining area, past tables where suited men murmured over scotch and couples leaned close over plates of seared salmon, toward the side wall, where tall windows framed a picturesque view of the bustling city street outside, pedestrians darting past in hurried streaks of color, yellow cabs weaving like fish through traffic. The city was alive out there, chaotic and relentless, but in here, behind the thick glass and velvet drapes, it all felt a world away. She stopped at a corner table by the window, tucked slightly apart from the others, giving it a sense of privacy without isolation. It was a beautiful spot. The sunlight poured through, painting soft gold across the tablecloth and making the wine glasses sparkle like little stars. The chair was thickly cushioned, the polished wood of the table cool under Marcus's fingers as he set down his briefcase. From here, he could see without being seen, part of the restaurant but not swallowed by it, able to watch the city and the people inside without ever feeling trapped. "This will do perfectly," he said, letting a grateful exhale escape. The hostess handed him a heavy leather-bound menu. "Our special today is Wagyu ribeye with black truffle mashed potatoes," she offered with a warm smile. "And might I recommend a glass of our house Merlot? It pairs wonderfully." Marcus chuckled softly, a rare sound lately. "You're reading my mind." She gave a small nod and disappeared back toward the kitchen with graceful steps, leaving Marcus alone in the golden pool of light. For the first time that day, he allowed his shoulders to relax, leaning back into the plush chair, feeling the tension bleed from his spine. He loosened his tie just a little, not enough to look sloppy, but enough to feel human again. The muted clink of silverware, the low rise and fall of conversation, the comforting weight of silence without judgment. It was exactly what he needed. For 1 hour, he told himself, just one blessed hour, he would not think about scandal or corruption or the files piled high on his desk back at City Hall. Here he was just another man, having lunch, minding his own business. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the rich smells and warm sounds around him, letting the world drift a little farther away. He didn't know yet that the world was about to come crashing right back through those doors, and with it trouble he could not ignore. The glass door of the Monarch table slammed open with a violent crack against the stopper, the sudden noise slicing through the smooth current of conversation like a blade through silk, drawing startled gasps and scraping chairs as heads jerked toward the entrance. The air, once thick with quiet sophistication, now quivered under the heavy-booted steps of Officer Troy Maddox as he stormed inside, his presence as subtle as a wrecking ball in the library. His navy uniform strained over his broad chest, the metal badge on his breast pocket gleaming under the soft chandelier light. But it was his face, tight, red, and coiled like a spring, that told everyone this was a man looking for a fight. Marcus Reese felt the shift instantly, the temperature in the room dropping 10 degrees as if a storm cloud had punched through the ceiling. His stomach tightened, his fingers brushing instinctively against the edge of the table, but he made no move to rise. He watched, calm but alert, as Maddox's icy blue gaze zeroed in on him with laser precision, and the heavy thud of the officer's boots grew louder, closer, until he stood towering over the small corner table like a shadow blotting out the sun. "That's my seat," Maddox barked, voice raw, scraping across the air like sandpaper, loud enough for every patron in the restaurant to hear. Marcus slowly lifted his gaze, meeting Maddox's glare with steady, unblinking calm. "I was seated here by the staff," he replied, voice low and even, controlled like a taut wire stretched over a canyon. Maddox's lips curled back in an ugly sneer, his hands resting dangerously close to the belt that carried his sidearm. "I sit here every damn week," he growled, the words practically foaming from his mouth, "and everybody knows it. This is my table, now move." His breath came fast and hot, his chest heaving slightly with suppressed rage. The restaurant had fallen into complete silence, the gentle clink of glass and silverware extinguished as if the very room were holding its breath. Diners stared into their laps or peeked through their fingers, afraid to watch but unable to look away. Waitstaff froze near the kitchen, exchanging nervous glances, unwilling to intervene. Marcus sat perfectly still, his hands resting lightly atop the tablecloth, his face a study in self-betrothed, though inside, his heart hammered against his ribs like a warning drum. "If there's been a misunderstanding, officer, I suggest you speak with the hostess," Marcus said, his voice carefully measured, each word deliberate, a scalpel cutting through the thick air between them. Maddox's nostrils flared so wide it looked like he might charge. He leaned forward, his hands slamming onto the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. "I'm not asking you, smug piece of trash," he hissed, low enough that only Marcus and the closest tables could hear. "I'm telling you, get your ass up before I make you." Marcus's jaw tightened ever so slightly, the only visible crack in his composed facade. "I've already ordered my lunch. I won't be moving," he said, voice firm, unwavering. A muscle ticked violently in Maddox's jaw. His fingers drummed against the tabletop like the cocking of a pistol. His eyes, so cold and bright, flashed with naked contempt. "You think just because you're wearing a suit and sitting in a fancy restaurant you're better than me?" he spat, his words dripping venom. "You don't belong here." There it was, the real blade beneath the threats, the ugly, festering rot that Marcus had seen 1,000 times before, dressed up in different uniforms. Marcus exhaled slowly, his body tense but steady, his eyes locked on Maddox's with the quiet certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was dealing with. "Be very careful, officer," Marcus said, his voice soft but cutting through the room like a gunshot. "Everyone here is listening." And they were. Every set of eyes fixed, every phone discreetly raised, cameras rolling under linen napkins and handbags, recording every second of this slow, public implosion. Maddox straightened, a bitter laugh barking out of him as he shook his head, his whole body trembling with suppressed fury. "You think these people are going to help you?" he sneered, jerking a thumb at the surrounding diners. "They won't lift a finger. They're scared, just like you should be." Marcus leaned back slightly, never breaking eye contact, the ghost of a grim smile flickering across his face. "I'm not scared," he said, quietly. The words hit Maddox like a slap. His face darkened, his fists balling so tight the knuckles turned bone white. He leaned in again, voice low and dripping hate. "You're gonna wish you'd been scared," he snarled. You're gonna wish you got up when I told you to." Marcus stayed utterly still, utterly calm, even as the tension thickened to the point of suffocation. Every instinct screamed at him that Maddox was on the edge of doing something reckless, something irreversible. And Marcus knew, without question, this confrontation wasn't about a table anymore. It wasn't about lunch. It wasn't even about power. It was about pride, and how far a man like Troy Maddox was willing to go to defend it. The storm was building to a roar, and Marcus could feel it, could feel the entire room bracing for impact. But he would not move, he would not blink, he would not surrender a single inch to a bully drunk on his own authority. Outside the tall window, the city carried on unaware, but inside the monarch table, the world had shrunk to this small corner of gold-lit silence, two men locked in a battle without words, and neither willing to look away first. Troy Maddox's chest heaved visibly, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and disbelief, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides like a man struggling to keep a dam from bursting, and for a single taut second Marcus Reese thought Maddox might storm away, might salvage the last scrap of dignity he still possessed. But instead, Maddox's hand dropped to his belt with a vicious, practiced flick, and before Marcus could fully process it, a black service pistol was in Maddox's hand, gleaming under the chandelier light, aimed squarely at Marcus's chest, freezing the entire restaurant in a scream of silence. There was a collective gasp, sharp and sudden, like 100 people had been slapped at once. Chairs scraped backwards, glasses toppled with faint shatters. A woman near the bar let out a strangled cry and ducked under her table, her napkin fluttering down like a white flag, and somewhere far across the room, the muffled click of a cell phone camera shutter broke the silence. Marcus didn't move. His muscles screamed to dive, to duck, to shield himself, but he stayed rooted, his spine rigid, his hands still flat on the table, his voice, when it came, a low and deadly calm, cutting through the thick electric air between them like a knife. "Put the gun down, officer," he said. Maddox's hand trembled slightly, a twitch that betrayed the chaos boiling inside him, but his voice when he spoke was loud and wild, cracking under the weight of fury. "I said get up," he roared, the gun shaking harder now, his whole body trembling as adrenaline flooded his veins. "Now, before I put you on the damn floor!" Marcus's heartbeat thundered in his ears, but his face betrayed nothing, his eyes locked unflinchingly on Maddox's, refusing to show fear, refusing to give him the satisfaction. "Think carefully, Troy," Marcus said, his voice low, his words deliberate like bullets loaded into a chamber. "You pull that trigger, and your badge won't be the only thing you lose." Maddox laughed, a hollow, ugly sound that cracked high at the edges. "You think you're somebody?" he spat, his face red and sweating. "You're nothing. You're a file on a desk, a stain on my damn city." "You're wrong," Marcus said evenly, feeling the weight of every eye in the restaurant boring into their standoff, knowing dozens of cameras were recording every word, every twitch of Maddox's shaking gun hand. "And you're not the law, Troy. You're the reason the law needs to be watched." Maddox's finger twitched dangerously close to the trigger, his jaw working like he was chewing on broken glass. For a split second Marcus thought this was it, that the man's rage would consume them both. But then, from across the restaurant, a second voice cut sharply through the tension, clear and commanding. "Officer Maddox, stand down right now." A young patrol officer, uniformed and wide-eyed, had entered through the front door, hand hovering just above his own holster, but not drawing, not yet. Officer Jordan Valdez, barely out of academy training by the look of him, his voice shaking just slightly, but holding. Maddox barely flicked his eyes toward the intrusion, his focus still locked on Marcus like a wolf cornering prey. "This doesn't concern you, rookie," Maddox growled, voice dripping contempt. Valdez's voice sharpened. "You're pointing a weapon at an unarmed civilian inside a public place. Drop the weapon, sir. This is over." Maddox snarled, the veins in his neck bulging, his whole frame shaking now with the effort of holding the gun steady. "Not until he learns some goddamn respect," he bellowed, his spit flying, his voice hoarse with the violence bottling up inside him. My Marcus, still utterly still, lifted his hand slowly, carefully, tapping the screen of his phone exactly once with a single practiced movement, no sudden gestures, no threats, just precision. And from somewhere hidden in the restaurant ceiling, a sudden crackle of static burst to life over the speakers, followed by a voice that dropped like a hammer over the room. "Sorry, Maddox, this is Chief Barbara Gaines. Lower your weapon immediately." Maddox froze like a statue carved from rage and fear, his gun hand stiffening, his eyes widening with naked panic as the voice of his own chief, stern and cold and very much present, echoed through the restaurant for all to hear. The silence was thunderous. "I have officers en route to your location," Chief Gaines continued, her voice slicing through the stunned room. "You are under direct order to disarm and surrender. If you do not comply, you will be treated as an active threat." The last word hung in the air like a gunshot itself. Maddox's hand shook violently, the pistol bobbing like a buoy in a storm, his face twisting through a kaleidoscope of emotions, defiance, disbelief, shame, terror, until finally, with a sound halfway between a snarl and a sob, he slowly lowered the gun to the table, the metal clattering against the glass with a finality that felt like the slamming of a prison door. Baldus was on him in a flash, kicking the weapon away and grabbing Maddox's wrists, snapping handcuffs on with a swift, practiced click as the room erupted into hushed murmurs and the distant whine of sirens grew louder outside. Marcus exhaled slowly, the air rushing from his lungs like a man surfacing from deep underwater, his hands still flat on the table, his heart still pounding so loudly he could barely hear. He had stood his ground. And he knew, as the front doors burst open and more officers poured inside, that this wasn't just a moment. It was the beginning of something much, much bigger. The double doors of the Monarch table burst open again, this time not with chaos but with cold, deliberate authority. Chief Barbara Gaines strode into the room, flanked by two senior officers, her polished black shoes striking the marble with heavy, unforgiving clicks that echoed through the stunned silence. Her presence cut through the room like a cleaver through bone. Tall, broad-shouldered, her short silver hair sharp as a blade, her brown eyes hard enough to chip stone. She didn't slow down, didn't hesitate, her gaze locking onto the scene ahead with the precise focus of a battlefield general surveying a fight already lost. Marcus Reese remained seated at his table, watching the approach with an unwavering calm that belied the storm still pounding in his chest, his eyes never leaving Maddox, who now stood stiffly beside Officer Valdez, handcuffed, pale, trembling, and radiating a cocktail of rage and humiliation so thick it seemed to suck the air out of the room. Chief Gaines stopped 3 feet from Maddox, her hands clasped behind her back, her entire body radiating the kind of authority that didn't need to shout to be obeyed. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, steady, and lethal. "Troy Maddox," she said, letting the name hang in the air like a death sentence. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Maddox swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly, his mouth opening, then closing again like a man drowning in his own stupidity. His voice, when it finally clawed its way out, was cracked and desperate. "Chief, he provoked me. He wouldn't move. Shut your mouth!" Gaines' voice cracked like a whip, slicing his pathetic excuses into ribbons. The entire restaurant flinched, a few diners audibly gasping. Maddox recoiled as if slapped, his shoulders shrinking in on themselves. Chief Gaines turned slightly, facing Marcus directly now, her expression softening by half a degree. "Mr. Reese," she said, her tone clipped but respectful. "Are you hurt?" Marcus shook his head once, firm. "No, Chief, not physically." Her eyes narrowed slightly at the implied weight of his words, but she nodded. She turned back to Maddox, stepping closer until there was barely a foot between them, her voice dropping to a level that still somehow carried to every corner of the restaurant. "You pulled a firearm on an unarmed civilian in a public restaurant," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "over a goddamn chair." Maddox's mouth worked soundlessly, sweat beading on his forehead, his breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. "You have disgraced that badge," Gaines continued, her voice rising now, each word hitting like a hammer blow. "You have disgraced this department. You have endangered every man and woman in this city who trust us to protect them, not terrorize them." Maddox's knees wobbled slightly, and for a moment Marcus thought he might actually collapse. Chief Gaines turned her head sharply, snapping to the officers beside her. "Effective immediately," she barked, her voice booming across the restaurant. "Troy Maddox is relieved of duty. Strip him of his badge and gun, now." One of the senior officers stepped forward without hesitation. Maddox flinched as the man unpinned his badge, tearing it free from his chest with a rough yank that sent a faint clatter echoing across the floor. The other officer reached to unclasp his duty belt, pulling the weapon from its holster, and stepping back as if it were tainted. Maddox stood there, stripped, handcuffed, stripped of everything that made him powerful, that made him feared, that made him dangerous. And now he was just another angry man cornered by his own damn mistakes. "Chief, please," Maddox tried again, his voice cracking into a whimper. "I say not another word," Gaines roared, and this time it was not just anger in her voice, but something deeper, something raw, betrayal, maybe, or heartbreak for a system she had spent a lifetime trying to defend, and that men like Maddox had poisoned. The heavy front doors swung open again, and more officers flooded inside, surrounding Maddox like a fortress of consequence. One of them took hold of his arm. As they began to lead him away, Maddox turned his head sharply toward Marcus, his eyes burning with hatred and something almost like pleading. His voice hissed out, ugly and broken. "You did this. You think this ends with me?" Marcus didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and cold as steel. "It doesn't end with you," he said. "It starts with you." Maddox's face twisted into something between a snarl and a sob, but the officers jerked him toward the door, and with a final slam of heavy boots, he was gone. The restaurant remained frozen for a heartbeat longer, the weight of what had just unfolded pressing down on every chest. Then, slowly, the tide of whispers rose. Questions, astonishment, the snapping of phone cameras still capturing the aftermath. Chief Gaines exhaled heavily, rubbing her temple once, visibly gathering herself before turning to Marcus. "This is going to blow up," she muttered, almost to herself, then louder, with grim finality. "But it needed to." Marcus rose from his chair at last, straightening his jacket, his face unreadable. "Yes, it did," he said simply. Chief Gaines nodded once, sharply, the steel returning to her spine. "This isn't over, Mr. Reese," she said. "Not by a long shot. We'll need a full statement, and then bigger things." Marcus offered a tight, grim smile, the kind forged in battles already fought and wars still to come. "I'm ready." Outside, the sirens had finally gone quiet. Inside the Monarch table, history had been written in the weight of silence, the fall of a badge, and the steady, unbreakable voice of a man who refused to move. And everyone knew this was just the beginning. By the time Marcus Reese stepped out into the afternoon sun, the Monarch table behind him still buzzing like a hive torn open, the world outside was already shifting under his feet. Word traveled fast in a city wired for outrage, and by the time the first patrol car pulled away with Troy Maddox in custody, there were already half a dozen bystanders standing across the street, their phones pointed like weapons, recording, posting, spreading. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a wildfire. The next morning, the headlines exploded across every screen, every paper, every radio broadcast, louder and hotter than Marcus could have imagined. "Officer pulls gun on city official over table dispute," blared in bold letters. "Captured on camera. Abuse of power at the Monarch table," screamed another. Every channel ran the footage. Marcus sitting calm as a stone, while Maddox raged and trembled, the gun shaking in his hand, the cold, echoing voice of Chief Gaines commanding surrender. Over and over the scene played out, and with each viewing the fire grew. By noon, protests swelled outside the downtown police headquarters. Banners waved in the hot air, "Accountability now, justice for all, not just for some, end the bad shield," their chants rising like thunder, shaking the marble steps and the windows of every office inside. In a corner office high above the chaos, Marcus Reese stood facing the window, his reflection ghosted against the glass, arms crossed tight across his chest. Behind him, Chief Barbara Gaines paced like a caged lion, a thick folder of disciplinary records clutched tight in her hand. "They're not going to let this die," Gaines said, her voice sharp, almost admiring, almost resigned. "And they shouldn't." "They won't," Marcus said quietly, his eyes locked on the pulsing crowd below. "And neither will I." Gaines tossed the folder onto the table with a thud. The papers spilled out, Maddox's internal complaints, abuse accusations, every warning sign ignored or buried. She ran a hand through her silver hair, looking suddenly 10 years older. "God damn it, Marcus," she muttered. "You lit a match under a powder keg." Marcus turned slowly, his face grim, determined. "No, Chief. Maddox lit it. I just refused to pretend I didn't smell the smoke." She barked a short, humorless laugh, then stabbed a finger at him. "You're not going to be popular after this. They're going to come after you. Hard. You sure you're ready for that?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I wasn't put here to be popular. I was put here to fix what's broken." Gaines stared at him for a long moment, then nodded, once, sharp and final like a guillotine dropping. "Then let's start cutting." Over the next few days, change came fast and brutal. Press conferences blared on every channel. Chief Gaines stood at the podium, her voice steel, announcing mandatory body cameras for all active duty officers, immediate independent reviews for any complaint of misconduct, the creation of a civilian oversight board with full subpoena power. The police union raged behind closed doors. Politicians scrambled to cover their exposed backsides. But the people, they roared with approval, their voices shaking the halls of power like a siege battering a rotten fortress. Inside the precinct, the walls cracked. Officers whispered in hallways, eyes wary, suspicious. Some glared at Marcus as he walked past, their stares like knives against his back. Others nodded, small, grudging nods of respect. They all knew it. The game had changed. The shield was no longer bulletproof. Late one evening, as Marcus gathered his things after another endless meeting, the door to his office creaked open and Officer Jordan Valdez stepped inside, his hat in his hands, his face tight and earnest. "Sir," Valdez said, his voice low, "just wanted to say, what you did, standing up to Maddox, standing up for all of us, thank you." Marcus studied him a long moment, then nodded, slow and steady. "It's not over yet, officer. Not by a long shot." Valdez straightened, his grip tightening on the brim of his hat. "Good," he said, and for the first time that week Marcus saw it, a flicker of hope, fragile but burning, lighting in the young man's eyes. As Valdez left, Marcus turned back toward the city outside his window, the neon glow painting the skyline in shades of rebellion and promise. The fire Maddox started had not burned Marcus down. It had forged him into something stronger. And the real battle was just beginning. The video tore through the city like a hurricane. In less than 24 hours it was everywhere, on news broadcasts, plastered across social media, flooding timelines and living rooms with the image of Troy Maddox, veins bulging, gun trembling in his hand, and Marcus Reese sitting calmly, hands flat on the table, unflinching. The headlines screamed louder than any siren. "Officer threatens unarmed official in restaurant standoff. The day the badge broke, talk shows raged, newspapers bled ink, and the city found itself staring into a mirror it could no longer deny." Crowds formed fast, marching through downtown, gathering outside police headquarters, their chants rattling the stone foundations. No more tyrants, accountability for all, protect, don't threaten. Banners waved like battle flags, fists punched the sky, and for the first time in years, the walls of power trembled not from deals whispered behind closed doors, but from the roar of the people outside them. Inside City Hall, the pressure boiled. Emergency meetings were called, press conferences hastily arranged. Marcus sat quietly at a long, polished table surrounded by officials who only weeks ago had barely tolerated his existence, and now hung on his every word like drowning men clawing for a lifeline. "We need your help," the mayor said, his voice brittle, his face pale. "You're the only one the public trusts right now." Marcus folded his hands, his voice sharp as a blade. "Then it starts today. Body cameras on every officer, no exceptions. A civilian oversight board, independent, fully funded, with subpoena power. And any officer with a history of violence, gone, not reassigned, not buried, gone. The mayor blanched. "That's aggressive." Marcus leaned in, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Not aggressive, necessary. You asked for my help, you don't get to pick and choose now." And so it was done. The orders signed, the systems changed, the first dominoes tipped. But the fire hadn't burned itself out yet. 3 months later, the trial began. The courthouse was a fortress of flashing cameras, protest signs, and furious murmurs as Troy Maddox was marched inside, wrists cuffed, flanked by guards, his once proud uniform replaced with an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. Inside the packed courtroom, the air was hot and suffocating, tension snapping like electric wires, every bench filled with reporters, activists, citizens who refused to look away. Marcus sat in the front row, expression carved from stone, watching every second. The charges rang out like thunder. Assault with a deadly weapon, abuse of authority, reckless endangerment. The prosecution hammered him hard. They played the video again and again, the jury flinching every time the gun appeared, every time Maddox's snarling voice filled the speakers. Witnesses lined up, diners, restaurant staff, even the elderly couple who had sat nearest that day, their voices shaking with remembered fear. Maddox's defense tried to spin its stress, a lapse in judgment, provocation, but the tape didn't lie, and the city didn't forget. In closing arguments, the prosecutor turned to the jury and said, voice ringing with cold fury, "This badge is not a shield for tyranny, not anymore." The jury took only 3 hours. Guilty. No mercy. No appeals. Sentenced to 4 years in state prison, no early release, barred forever from serving in law enforcement again. When the verdict was read, Maddox slumped forward, his forehead hitting the defense table with a dull, hollow thud. As the bailiff cuffed him, Maddox lifted his head once, his face a wreck of regret and shame, and locked eyes with Marcus across the room. For the first time there was no hatred, no defiance, only broken understanding. Marcus stared back, his face unreadable, and in that look Maddox saw the truth. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring something Maddox had thrown away. And it was done. 1 year later, the city was different. Not perfect, never perfect, but different. Body cameras glinted on every officer's chest. Civilian oversight committees held real power. Badges carried a new kind of weight, earned, not assumed. Marcus Reese still walked the corridors of power, though now his name was spoken with a mixture of fear and respect. Some smiled at him, others scowled, but no one ignored him. On a clear spring afternoon, Marcus found himself once again at the monarch table, the same corner window seat waiting for him like a silent sentinel. The city buzzed beyond the glass, alive and chaotic as ever, but here, inside, there was peace. The real kind, not the fragile illusion of before. He sat down, ordered a coffee, and let himself breathe. His eyes drifted toward the window, watching people move, watching life go on. And in the reflection of the glass he saw himself, not just a man who had survived a storm, but a man who had chosen to stand in its center and refuse to bow. And he knew, as surely as he knew his own heartbeat, that the fight was never really over. But for today, for this moment, he had won. And that was enough.